They told her to stay in the rear with the supplies. No weapon qualification, no tactical training, not even a place in the formation briefings. She stood behind stacks of medical equipment while junior Marines ran drills she had designed in theory but was never allowed to practice. Her recommendations filed away, unread. Then everything changed when hostile contact turned a routine patrol into a nightmare, and the only person who could navigate them out alive was the one they'd kept furthest from the fight, the morning air. At Camp Pendleton carried the familiar weight of diesel exhaust and ocean salt, mixed with the sharp scent of cordite from the firing ranges that had been active since dawn. Concrete barriers lined the training compound in perfect geometric rows, their surfaces bleached white from years of California sun and scarred with the impact marks of countless training exercises. Beyond the perimeter fence, the Pacific stretched endlessly toward the horizon, its surface broken only by the occasional Navy vessel conducting offshore maneuvers. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her grip on the clipboard as she walked the length of the administrative building, her boots striking the pavement with the measured cadence of someone who had learned to make noise count. The building's exterior was standard military issue, painted in regulation beige with metal doors that reflected the morning glare like mirrors. Small windows dotted the facade at regular intervals, each one covered with Venetian blinds that filtered the sunlight into thin horizontal lines across the interior floors. Inside, the hallway stretched for what seemed like miles, lined with photographs of distinguished Marine units dating back to World War II. The images showed men in various combat poses, their faces serious beneath campaign covers, their uniforms bearing the ribbons and insignia of battles fought in distant places whose names had become legend. The air conditioning hummed constantly, fighting against the heat that pressed through every seal and crack in the building's envelope. Maria's destination was the personnel office, a cramped space at the far end of the corridor where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and cast everything in a harsh clinical glow. The walls were covered with duty rosters, training schedules, and memoranda printed on paper that had already begun to curl at the edges from the constant battle between air conditioning and coastal humidity. Behind a metal desk that looked like it had been requisitioned sometime during the Reagan administration sat Corporal Jenkins, a thin man whose wire-rimmed glasses reflected the computer screen he stared at with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex mathematical equation. "Santos," he said without looking up, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone who had delivered the same message dozens of times before. "Your request for combat training has been reviewed and denied. Again." Maria stood at attention, her posture perfect despite the disappointment that settled in her chest like a stone. She had submitted the paperwork every month for the past 8 months, each time hoping that someone in the chain of command would recognize what she brought to the table. Her academic record was flawless, her physical fitness scores consistently ranked in the top 5% of her peer group. Her tactical knowledge, gained through years of studying every manual the Corps had ever published, was encyclopedic, but none of that mattered. Not here. Not in a system that had been designed by men, for men, with little consideration for the women who wanted to serve alongside them in the most dangerous and demanding roles the military had to offer. "Can I ask why?" she said, keeping her voice level and professional. Jenkins finally looked up, his expression suggesting that the question was both expected and unwelcome. "Same reason as before, combat exclusion policy. Women aren't authorized for infantry assignments or combat training programs. You can file an appeal, but the answer's going to be the same." Maria nodded once, accepting the decision with the same quiet dignity she had shown every month for the past 8 months. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Corporal Jenkins," she said, her voice carrying just enough edge to get his attention. "When that policy changes, I want to be first in line." "Yeah, sure," Jenkins replied, already turning back to his computer screen. "I'll make a note of it." The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Maria found herself back in the hallway, surrounded by the photographs of Marines who had earned their place in history through courage, skill, and dedication. She studied their faces, wondering if any of them had ever been told they weren't good enough, weren't strong enough, weren't the right fit for the job they desperately wanted to do. The walk back to her assigned duty station took her past the training areas, where her male counterparts were conducting close-quarters combat drills. Through the chain-link fence, she could see them moving through a mock urban environment, their movements precise and coordinated as they practiced room-clearing techniques and small unit tactics. The sound of blank ammunition echoed across the compound, mixed with the sharp commands of drill instructors who pushed their charges to perform at the highest level. Maria slowed her pace, watching as one of the squads approached a doorway with textbook precision. The point man signaled to his team. They stacked against the wall, and on his command, they flowed through the opening like water, each Marine knowing exactly where to go and what to do. It was beautiful in its efficiency, a dance of violence and coordination that represented years of training and countless hours of practice, but Maria could see the flaws. The point man had exposed himself to potential crossfire from a window on the second floor. The team had bunched up too tightly in the doorway, creating a target-rich environment for any defender with a grenade. Their communication was sloppy, relying too heavily on hand signals that might not be visible in low-light conditions. She pulled a small notebook from her cargo pocket and made a few quick observations, sketching the layout of the mock building and noting the tactical errors she had witnessed. It was a habit she had developed over the past year, studying every training exercise she could observe and analyzing the performance of units she was forbidden to join. Her notebook was filled with similar observations, tactical insights, and suggested improvements that would never be seen by anyone in a position to act on them. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days in the medical section, treating the injuries that resulted from the very training she was denied access to. Sprained ankles from obstacle courses, cuts and bruises from hand-to-hand combat practice, and the occasional more serious injury from live-fire exercises. The Marines she treated often talked about their training, describing the challenges they faced and the techniques they were learning. Maria listened, asked questions, and filed away every detail in her memory for future reference. Her supervisor, Hospital Corpsman First Class Rodriguez, had noticed her interest in tactical medicine and had begun including her in discussions about battlefield treatment protocols. Rodriguez was a veteran of 3 deployments, a man whose weathered face and steady hands spoke of experience gained in the most dangerous places on Earth. He had seen Maria's potential and had begun teaching her advanced trauma care techniques that went far beyond her basic medical training. "You've got good instincts," Rodriguez had told her during a particularly challenging training scenario. "You think like a Marine, not just a medic. That's rare." It was the closest thing to recognition she had received since arriving at Camp Pendleton. Rodriguez understood that Maria's medical skills were enhanced by her tactical knowledge, that her ability to think like a combatant made her a better healer. But even his influence had limits. He couldn't change policy, couldn't open doors that had been deliberately sealed shut. The afternoon brought a familiar routine. Maria reported to the medical facility, a modern building that stood in stark contrast to the aging administrative complex. The interior was sterile and efficient, with white walls, polished floors, and equipment that represented the latest in military medical technology. The treatment rooms were equipped with everything needed to handle injuries, ranging from minor cuts to life-threatening trauma. Maria's station was in the emergency treatment bay, where she worked alongside a team of corpsmen and doctors who had learned to rely on her skills and judgment. The work was challenging and rewarding, but it wasn't the job she had enlisted to do. Every day, she watched Marines prepare for deployments she would never be part of, training for missions she would never be assigned to, developing skills she would never be allowed to use. The radio chatter from the training areas provided a constant background soundtrack to her work. She listened to the communications between units, learning their procedures and protocols, understanding how they coordinated their movements and shared information. It was an education that no classroom could provide. A graduate-level course in small unit tactics delivered through the professional conversations of Marines who were preparing for war. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the training compound, Maria completed her shift and prepared to return to her barracks. The day had been like every other day since her arrival at Camp Pendleton, filled with professional competence and personal frustration. She was good at her job, respected by her peers, and trusted by her supervisors. But she was also confined to a role that utilized only a fraction of her abilities, a square peg being forced into a round hole by regulations that had more to do with tradition than capability. Walking across the compound in the gathering dusk, Maria passed the memorial wall where the names of fallen Marines were inscribed in black granite. The wall was lit by soft spotlights that made the names seem to glow against the dark stone. She paused, reading the names of men who had died in service to their country, wondering if any of them had ever doubted their right to be there, their fitness for the job, their place in the brotherhood of Marines. The barracks was quiet when she arrived. Most of her fellow Marines either still on duty or gathered in the common areas watching television and writing letters home. Maria's room was small but comfortable, with a single bed, a desk, and a locker that contained her personal belongings. The walls were bare, except for a small American flag and a photograph of her family taken the day she graduated from boot camp. She sat at her desk and opened her notebook, reviewing the observations she had made during the day, the tactical errors she had witnessed, the communication problems she had identified, the training deficiencies that could cost lives in a real combat situation. She had solutions for most of these problems, innovations that could improve performance and increase survivability. But her ideas would remain confined to the pages of her notebook, invisible to the people who needed to hear them. Outside her window, the lights of the training areas continued to burn bright against the darkness. Night training exercises were underway, Marines practicing the skills they would need to fight and survive in the most dangerous places on Earth. The sound of their voices carried across the compound, muffled by distance but clear in their purpose and intensity. Maria closed her notebook and prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of watching from the sidelines, another day of being denied the chance to prove herself worthy of the title she had earned, but was forbidden to fully claim. She had joined the Marines to serve her country, to test herself against the highest standards, to be part of something larger than herself. Instead, she found herself trapped in a system that valued her contributions but questioned her courage, that needed her skills but doubted her strength. But she would not give up. She would continue to learn, to prepare, to study every aspect of the job she wanted to do. Because someday, somehow, the opportunity would come. And when it did, she would be ready. What moment in your career made you realize you were more capable than anyone gave you credit for? Have you ever been the person in the room who saw the solution while others struggled with the problem, only to have your voice dismissed or ignored completely? If this story resonates with the fire burning inside you to prove your worth, consider subscribing to hear more tales of those who turned doubt into triumph, who transformed rejection into resilience, and who proved that excellence has no gender, no predetermined path, and no shortcuts. Your support helps amplify the voices of those who refuse to accept limitations others tried to place on them. The mess hall at Camp Pendleton buzzed with the familiar din of 500 Marines eating breakfast before the day's training began. Steam rose from industrial-sized coffee urns while the clatter of metal trays against stainless steel serving surfaces created a percussion that echoed off the concrete walls. Fluorescent lights hung from the ceiling in long rows, casting everything in a harsh white glow that made the beige walls look even more institutional than they already were. The air carried the mixed aromas of bacon grease, powdered eggs, and the industrial-strength coffee that had fueled military operations since time immemorial. Maria sat at a corner table with 3 other Marines from her unit, their conversation flowing around topics that ranged from weekend liberty, plans to complaints about the latest changes to physical fitness requirements. The table was standard military issue, its surface scarred from years of use and covered with a thin layer of moisture that seemed to appear no matter how often the cleaning crew wiped it down. Around them, the mess hall was divided into the informal social hierarchy that existed in every military unit, with senior enlisted personnel occupying the tables near the windows while junior Marines clustered in the center of the room. "Santos, you hear about the new combat training initiative?" asked Lance Corporal Williams, a wiry man from Alabama whose drawl became more pronounced when he was excited about something. He leaned forward conspiratorially, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Word is they're finally going to start letting women into some of the advanced programs." Maria looked up from her scrambled eggs, her expression carefully neutral. She had learned not to get too excited about rumors that circulated through the barracks like wildfire, most of which turned out to be nothing more than wishful thinking or deliberate misinformation. "Where'd you hear that?" "Sergeant Martinez mentioned it during yesterday's formation," Williams replied, gesturing with his fork toward the far side of the mess hall where their squad leader was sitting with other NCOs. "Says there's pressure from Washington to expand opportunities. Equal opportunity stuff." Corporal Davis, a muscular woman from Texas who worked in the motor pool, snorted derisively. "I'll believe it when I see it. They've been saying that for years. Every time there's a new directive from headquarters, everyone gets all worked up thinking things are going to change. Then nothing happens." Private First Class Thompson, barely 19 and still adjusting to military life, looked confused. "But why wouldn't they want the best people in combat roles? I mean, if someone can do the job, what difference does it make?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a cigarette, creating an uncomfortable silence at the table. Maria could see the older Marines exchanging glances, their expressions suggesting that Thompson's innocent question had touched on something more complex than simple logic or fairness. Davis was the first to speak, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had navigated the military's gender dynamics for longer than she cared to remember. "It's not about what makes sense, Thompson," she said, her tone patient but firm. "It's about tradition. About the way things have always been done. About people who think that changing the rules somehow makes the whole system weaker." Williams nodded in agreement, his expression growing more serious. "Plus, there's the whole physical standards thing. The argument that women can't carry the same load, can't keep up with the pace, can't handle the stress of combat. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. It's what people believe." Maria continued eating her breakfast, but her mind was racing through the implications of what her table mates were discussing. She had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times, each one following the same predictable pattern. Someone would mention the possibility of expanded opportunities for women. Others would express skepticism, and the discussion would eventually devolve into a debate about physical capabilities and traditional roles. What frustrated her most was how the conversation always focused on theoretical limitations rather than demonstrated capabilities. The men at her table had never seen her perform under pressure, had never witnessed her tactical knowledge in action, had never tested her physical or mental resilience against their own. They were making assumptions based on generalizations and stereotypes rather than individual merit. "What do you think, Santos?" Davis asked, apparently noticing Maria's silence. "You've been trying to get into combat training for months. Think. This rumor might actually lead to something." Maria set down her fork and looked around the table at her fellow Marines. These were good people, she knew. Men and women who had volunteered to serve their country and who genuinely wanted to do their jobs well. But they were also products of a system that had taught them to think in certain ways, to accept certain limitations as natural and inevitable. "I think capability should be the only standard that matters," she said carefully. "If someone can meet the requirements, if they can perform the job, then they should get the chance to prove themselves. Everything else is just noise." Thompson nodded enthusiastically, but Williams looked skeptical. "Easy to say, harder to implement. What happens when someone gets hurt because they couldn't keep up? What happens when unit cohesion breaks down? Because people are distracted by having women in combat roles?" The question revealed assumptions that Maria had encountered countless times before. The idea that women were inherently more fragile, more likely to be injured, more likely to disrupt unit effectiveness. She had read the studies, knew the statistics, understood the physical and psychological demands of combat better than most of the men who questioned her fitness for the role. "What happens when someone gets hurt because they're not properly trained?" she countered. "What happens when unit cohesion breaks down because the best people are sitting on the sidelines while less capable people are put in critical positions?" The discussion continued for several more minutes, touching on topics that ranged from physical fitness standards to unit morale to the experiences of other militaries that had already integrated women into combat roles. Maria participated when directly asked, but mostly she listened, noting the underlying assumptions and biases that shaped her colleagues' perspectives. As breakfast wound down and Marines began clearing their trays and preparing for the day's duties, Maria found herself walking alongside Davis toward the exit. The older woman had been quiet during the latter part of the conversation, her expression thoughtful as she listened to the different viewpoints being expressed. "You know," Davis said as they stepped outside into the morning sunshine, "I've been watching you for months. The way you study everything, the way you think about tactical problems, the way you handle yourself under pressure. I think you'd do fine in a combat role." Maria felt a surge of gratitude toward the woman who had just expressed confidence in her abilities. It was rare to hear such direct support, especially from someone who had navigated the military's gender dynamics successfully enough to earn respect from her male peers. "Thanks," Maria replied. "I appreciate that." Davis nodded, then glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "But here's the thing you need to understand. It's not going to be enough to be as good as the men. You're going to have to be better, significantly better. And even then, there are going to be people who find reasons to doubt you." The words stung because Maria knew they were true. She had observed the dynamic in every aspect of military life, from physical fitness tests to professional evaluations to informal leadership opportunities. Women were held to different standards, sometimes higher, sometimes simply different, but rarely the same as their male counterparts. "I know," Maria said quietly. "I've been preparing for that." "Good," Davis replied. "Because if this rumor turns out to be true, if they really do start opening up combat training to women, you're going to be under a microscope. Every mistake will be magnified, every success will be minimized, and every day you're going to have to prove that you belong there." They walked in silence for a few moments, their boots crunching on the gravel path that led toward the training areas. Around them, the base was coming to life with the controlled chaos of a military installation beginning its daily routine. Vehicles moved along the roads with purpose. Marines jogged in formation along the sidewalks, and the distant sound of training exercises echoed across the compound. "The thing is," Davis continued, "I think you can handle it. I think you're tough enough, smart enough, and dedicated enough to succeed. But I also think you need to be realistic about what you're up against." Maria nodded, understanding the warning implicit in Davis's words. The older woman was trying to prepare her for the reality of being a pioneer, of being among the first to enter a previously closed domain. It would require not just competence, but exceptional performance under extraordinary scrutiny. As they reached the point where their paths diverged, Davis stopped and turned to face Maria directly. If the opportunity comes, take it. Don't second-guess yourself. Don't let anyone talk you out of it, and don't apologize for wanting it. But also don't go into it thinking it's going to be easy or fair. I won't, Maria promised. Davis smiled, the expression transforming her usually serious face. Good, because I think you're going to make history, Santos. And when you do, I want to be able to say I knew you when. The rest of the morning passed in routine duties that had become second nature to Maria over the past year. She reported to the medical facility, checked in with her supervisors, and began the day's work treating the inevitable injuries that resulted from intensive military training. The work was important, and she was good at it, but it felt increasingly like a consolation prize rather than a career. During her lunch break, Maria walked to the base library, a quiet building that served as a refuge from the constant activity of military life. The interior was cool and dimly lit, with rows of books and periodicals that covered everything from military history to technical manuals to popular fiction. She made her way to the reference section, where she had spent countless hours studying tactical doctrine, weapon systems, and combat techniques. Her destination was a corner table where she had left a stack of books the previous day, their pages marked with sticky notes and highlighted passages. The volumes covered topics ranging from small unit tactics to battlefield medicine to leadership principles, each one representing another piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. How to become not just competent, but exceptional. How to prepare for opportunities that might never come. How to be ready for anything. As she opened the first book, Maria noticed another Marine at a nearby table watching her with curiosity. He was older, probably in his 30s, with the weathered look of someone who had spent considerable time in the field. His uniform bore the insignia of a staff sergeant, and his bearing suggested the quiet confidence of an experienced leader. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low enough not to disturb other library patrons, "but I couldn't help noticing what you're reading. That's some pretty advanced tactical material." Maria looked up, unsure whether the comment was meant as a compliment or a challenge. "I'm trying to expand my knowledge base," she replied carefully. The staff sergeant smiled, the expression suggesting genuine interest rather than skepticism. "Mind if I ask why?" "Not too many people study that stuff unless they're already in a position to use it." "I'm hoping to be someday," Maria said. The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. I run the Advanced Marksmanship program. I've seen your name on some of the training requests that come through my office." Maria felt her pulse quicken. Rodriguez was something of a legend on base, a decorated veteran who had earned his reputation through multiple combat deployments, and had been chosen to train the Marines who would serve in the most dangerous assignments. His opinion carried weight throughout the command structure. "Yes, sir," she replied. "I've been hoping to get into some of the advanced training programs." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying her with the appraising look of someone who had learned to judge people quickly and accurately. "What's your background, besides medical, I mean?" Maria gave him a brief summary of her training and experience, emphasizing her academic achievements and her consistent performance in physical fitness tests. Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification on specific points. "Interesting," he said when she finished. "I've been following the discussions about expanding combat training opportunities. There's definitely momentum building at higher levels. But you probably know that implementing policy changes takes time, especially when they involve fundamental shifts in how we do business." "Yes, sir," Maria agreed. "I'm trying to be patient." Rodriguez chuckled. "Patience is good, but preparation is better. Tell me, what do you think is the most important skill for a Marine in a combat situation?" The question caught Maria off guard. She had expected to discuss policy and procedures, not to be tested on tactical knowledge. But she recovered quickly, drawing on months of study and observation. Adaptability, she said without hesitation. The ability to assess a situation quickly, identify the most important factors, and respond effectively even when conditions change rapidly. Rodriguez's eyebrows rose slightly, suggesting that her answer had surprised him. Interesting choice. Most people would say marksmanship or physical fitness or courage. Those are all important, Maria replied, but they're tools. Adaptability is what allows you to use those tools effectively in different situations. The staff sergeant nodded slowly, his expression suggesting that he was reassessing his initial impressions. You've given this some thought? Yes, sir, I have. Rodriguez stood up, gathering his materials and preparing to leave. Well, Santos, I hope you get your chance. I think you might surprise some people. As he walked away, Maria felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The conversation had been brief, but it represented the first time a senior Marine had engaged with her seriously about combat training rather than simply dismissing her interest as unrealistic or inappropriate. She returned to her studies with renewed focus, determined to be ready for whatever opportunities might arise. Outside the library windows, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the training areas where Marines continued their preparations for deployments and missions that would test everything they had learned. Maria knew that her time would come. She just had to be patient, prepared, and ready to prove that excellence knew no boundaries. The combat training facility at Camp Pendleton existed in a state of perpetual controlled chaos. Its sprawling complex of buildings and outdoor training areas designed to simulate every conceivable combat environment a Marine might encounter. The main briefing hall stood at the center of it all, a massive concrete structure whose brutalist architecture seemed to absorb sound and light with equal efficiency. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of floor wax, gun oil, and the lingering traces of cordite that had seeped into the walls over decades of use. Maria entered through the rear doors, her freshly pressed utilities crisp against the humid morning air. The hallway stretched before her like a gauntlet, lined with display cases containing weapons, equipment, and photographs from every major conflict since World War II. The cases were illuminated by recessed lighting that cast dramatic shadows across the artifacts within, creating an atmosphere that was part museum, part shrine to military prowess. Her orders had arrived 3 days earlier, typed on official letterhead and signed by someone whose name she didn't recognize, but whose authority was unquestionable. She was to report to the Advanced Infantry Training Course as an observer, with specific instructions to maintain a low profile and avoid disrupting the established training protocols. The language was carefully neutral, but Maria understood what it really meant. She was being allowed to watch but not to participate, to learn but not to demonstrate what she had learned. The briefing room was arranged in ascending rows of chairs, each equipped with a small writing surface and positioned to provide an unobstructed view of the projection screen at the front. The walls were covered with maps, organizational charts, and tactical diagrams that had been laminated and mounted with military precision. Everything was clean, organized, and designed to convey the seriousness of the subject matter. Marines, filed in according to a hierarchy that had been established through months of training together. The senior students, those who had already proven themselves in earlier phases of the program, occupied the front rows. Their uniforms bore the subtle indicators of experience: faded fabric where gear had rubbed against cloth, small modifications that improved functionality, and the confident posture of men who had earned their place through performance rather than assignment. Behind them sat the newer arrivals, their uniforms still showing the sharp creases of recent issue and their movements, carrying the slight uncertainty of those still learning the unwritten rules of their environment. They watched the senior students with the mixture of respect and ambition that characterized every military training program. Eager to prove themselves worthy of advancement, Maria took a seat in the back row, as far from the center of attention as possible. Her chair was positioned at the end of the row, separated from the others by a small gap that seemed to emphasize her outsider status. She had no notebook, no writing materials, no official reason to be there beyond the cryptic orders that had brought her to this place. The instructor entered with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Major Harrison was a compact man in his early 40s, his salt and pepper hair cropped short and his weathered face bearing the kind of tan that came from years of outdoor training exercises. His uniform was impeccable, every detail perfect, and his bearing suggested the quiet confidence of someone who had proven himself in the most demanding circumstances. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily to the back of the room without seeming to strain, "today we're going to discuss urban combat tactics, specifically room clearing procedures and close quarters battle techniques. These are skills that have been refined through decades of experience, paid for with blood, and proven effective in environments ranging from Fallujah to Helmand Province." He activated a slide projector that filled the screen with a schematic diagram of a multi-story building. The image was detailed and precise, showing room layouts, stairwells, and potential fields of fire with the kind of accuracy that suggested it had been drawn by someone with extensive combat experience. Urban combat is fundamentally different from any other type of warfare, Harrison continued, using a laser pointer to highlight specific areas of the diagram. The enemy has the advantage of prepared positions, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and the ability to move through the environment using routes that may not be apparent to attacking forces. Maria leaned forward slightly, her attention focused on the details of the presentation. She had studied urban combat extensively, reading everything from official doctrine to after-action reports from recent conflicts. But this was different. This was instruction being delivered by someone who had actually applied these techniques in combat, who had learned their effectiveness through experience rather than academic study. "The key to successful urban operations," Harrison explained, "is speed, surprise, and violence of action. You move fast, you hit hard, and you don't give the enemy time to react. But you also have to be smart about it. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and you're dead. Or worse, you get your teammates killed." The slide advanced to show a sequence of photographs from actual combat operations. Maria recognized some of the locations from her studies, but seeing them in the context of tactical instruction gave them new meaning. These weren't historical artifacts or training aids. They were lessons learned at the cost of lives, techniques developed through trial and error in the most unforgiving classroom imaginable. "Who can tell me the primary considerations for entering a room under hostile conditions?" Harrison asked, his gaze sweeping across the assembled Marines. Several hands shot up immediately. Harrison pointed to a lance corporal in the third row, a young man whose eagerness was evident in his posture and expression. "Speed and surprise, sir, you want to get in fast before the enemy can react." "Correct, but incomplete," Harrison replied. "What else?" Another Marine, this one a corporal with the confident bearing of someone who had been through the course before, raised his hand. "Sectors of fire, sir. You need to know where each team member is going to be responsible for covering." "Better," Harrison acknowledged. "But you're still missing something critical." The room fell silent as Marines considered the question. Maria felt the answer forming in her mind, drawn from her extensive study of urban combat tactics and her analysis of countless training scenarios. She knew what Harrison was looking for, but she also knew that speaking up would violate the implicit terms of her presence in the room. "Communication," called out a sergeant from the front row. "You need to be able to coordinate with your team members throughout the operation." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Communication is what separates a successful room clearing operation from a disaster. You need to know where your teammates are, what they're doing, and what they're seeing. You need to be able to adapt your actions based on changing conditions. And you need to be able to do all of this while under fire, under stress, and under time pressure. The presentation continued for another hour, covering topics ranging from explosive breaching techniques to casualty evacuation procedures. Maria absorbed every detail, comparing the instruction she was receiving to the theoretical knowledge she had gained through independent study. In many cases, the practical application differed significantly from the textbook version, shaped by the realities of combat that no manual could fully capture. During a brief break, she noticed several Marines glancing in her direction, with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. She had expected this reaction, understanding that her presence represented an unusual departure from established norms. Most of the Marines in the room had earned their place through months of rigorous training and evaluation. She was there because of paperwork and policy decisions made at levels far above their pay grade. "Excuse me," said a voice from beside her. Maria turned to see a staff sergeant approaching, his expression neutral, but his posture suggesting official business. "You're Santos, right? The observer?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Maria replied, coming to attention. "I'm Staff Sergeant Mitchell. I run the practical exercises for this course. Major Harrison asked me to brief you on the safety protocols for the live-fire portions of the training." Maria nodded, understanding that this was another way of emphasizing her outsider status. While the other Marines would be participating in the exercises, she would be watching from designated safe areas, protected by barriers and distance from the activities that represented the real purpose of the training. "You'll be positioned in the observation tower during the live-fire exercises," Mitchell explained. "You'll have a clear view of the training area, but you're not to leave the tower under any circumstances. The exercises are designed to be as realistic as possible, which means they're also dangerous. We can't have anyone in the training area who isn't fully qualified and integrated into the exercise." "I understand, Staff Sergeant," Maria said. Mitchell studied her for a moment, his expression suggesting that he was trying to assess something beyond her understanding of safety protocols. "You know," he said finally, "I've heard about your interest in combat training. I've also heard that you've been studying this stuff on your own time." "Yes, Staff Sergeant, I have." "Well, watching is better than nothing, I suppose. But there's a big difference between studying something and actually doing it. Combat training isn't an academic exercise. It's about muscle memory, split-second decision-making, and the ability to perform under pressure. You can't learn that from books." Maria felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest, the same emotion she had experienced countless times when well-meaning people explained to her why she couldn't do something she desperately wanted to do. But she also recognized the truth in Mitchell's words. There was indeed a difference between theoretical knowledge and practical application, between studying techniques and executing them under stress. "I understand, Staff Sergeant," she said. Again, Mitchell nodded and walked away, leaving Maria alone with her thoughts and the growing realization that being an observer was going to be more challenging than she had anticipated. She was being given access to training that few Marines ever saw, but she was also being constantly reminded that she was not really part of it. When the session resumed, Harrison began discussing the psychological aspects of urban combat. "The stress of close-quarters battle is unlike anything else you'll experience," he explained. "You're operating in confined spaces, often in darkness or limited visibility, with enemies who may be just a few feet away. Your adrenaline is pumping, your heart rate is elevated, and you're making life-or-death decisions in fractions of a second." He advanced to a slide showing statistics on combat stress reactions and their impact on performance. "This is why training is so important. You need to practice these techniques until they become automatic, until you can execute them properly, even when your conscious mind is overwhelmed by stress and fear. Maria found herself nodding along with the presentation, remembering similar points from her medical training about how the human body responded to extreme stress. She understood the physiological mechanisms involved, the way adrenaline affected fine motor control, the importance of training that addressed both physical and mental preparation. The enemy understands this too, Harrison continued. They know that if they can create chaos, if they can disrupt your training and your procedures, they can force you to make mistakes. That's why discipline is so important. That's why you drill these procedures over and over until they become second nature. The final portion of the session covered equipment and weapons considerations specific to urban combat. Harrison discussed the advantages and disadvantages of different weapon systems, the importance of proper gear selection, and the modifications that experienced units made to standard equipment based on lessons learned in combat. Maria listened with particular interest to this section, since her medical training had given her insights into the types of injuries associated with different weapons and environments. She understood the medical implications of tactical decisions, the way equipment choices affected casualty rates, and the importance of planning for medical support in urban operations. As the session concluded, Harrison summarized the key points and announced that the next phase of training would involve practical exercises in the urban combat facility. Remember, he said, everything we've discussed today is just preparation. The real learning happens when you start applying these techniques under realistic conditions. Tomorrow we'll see how well you've absorbed the material. The Marines filed out of the briefing room with the purposeful movement of people who had work to do. Maria remained seated for a moment, processing what she had learned and preparing herself for the role she would play in the coming exercises. She would be watching from the sidelines, observing techniques she had studied but never practiced, seeing in action the skills she desperately wanted to develop. As she finally stood to leave, Maria caught sight of herself in the reflection of a window. She saw a Marine in proper uniform, someone who belonged in this environment and who had earned the right to be there through dedication and performance. But she also saw someone who was being held back by factors beyond her control, someone whose potential was being limited by policies and perceptions that had nothing to do with capability. The walk back to her quarters took her past the urban combat facility where tomorrow's exercises would take place. Through the chain-linked fence, she could see the maze of buildings and obstacles that had been constructed to simulate the environments where Marines would fight and die. It was a place where theory became practice, where training became reality, and where Marines proved themselves worthy of the title they carried. Maria stopped at the fence, her fingers curling around the metal links as she studied the training area beyond. Somewhere in those buildings, among those obstacles, lay the challenges she wanted to face and the opportunities she wanted to earn. For now, she could only watch, but she was determined that someday, somehow, she would find a way to prove that she belonged on the other side of the fence. The observation tower stood 25 feet above the urban combat training facility, its steel framework painted in the same utilitarian gray as every other structure on the base. From her position behind the reinforced glass windows, Maria had an unobstructed view of the mock city below, a carefully constructed maze of buildings, alleyways, and obstacles designed to replicate the urban environments where modern warfare was increasingly fought. The morning sun cast long shadows between the structures, creating pockets of darkness that would challenge even the most experienced Marines. Below her, the first training squad was conducting their equipment check, their movements efficient and practiced as they prepared for the live-fire exercise. Maria watched through binoculars as they tested their communications equipment, verified their ammunition loads, and conducted final inspections of their protective gear. Each Marine carried the standard M4 carbine, but their individual equipment configurations reflected their specific roles within the squad. The point man carried additional breaching tools. The squad leader had extra radio equipment, and the designated marksman was equipped with an enhanced optic system. The exercise controller, a master sergeant with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of urban combat, spoke into his headset with the calm authority of someone who had seen these scenarios played out hundreds of times. His voice carried clearly through the tower's communication system, providing Maria with insight into the coordination required to manage a complex training evolution. First Squad, this is Control. You are cleared to begin your approach to building Alpha. Remember, this is a live-fire exercise. Your targets are clearly marked, but maintain proper muzzle discipline at all times. Any safety violations will result in immediate termination of the exercise. Maria adjusted her binoculars and focused on the lead Marine as he approached the first building. His movement was textbook perfect, low and quick, his weapon held at the ready position while his eyes constantly scanned for threats. Behind him, the rest of the squad moved in a staggered formation, maintaining spacing that would prevent a single enemy action from compromising the entire unit. The building they were approaching was a 3-story structure with multiple entry points and windows that could conceal enemy positions. Maria had studied the layout during the previous day's briefing, noting the tactical challenges it presented and the various approaches that could be used to clear it safely. The squad leader had chosen a simultaneous entry strategy with teams hitting the front and rear entrances while a support element provided overwatch from an adjacent building. As the Marines reached their assault positions, Maria noticed a subtle problem with their positioning. The rear assault team had taken cover behind a low wall that provided concealment from the building's windows, but they were also directly in the line of fire from the overwatch position. If the support team needed to engage targets in the building, they would be unable to do so without potentially hitting their own teammates. She reached for the notepad she had brought to the tower, intending to record her observations for later review. The problem was significant, but not immediately dangerous, since the exercise was carefully controlled and the ammunition was designed to mark targets rather than cause injury. However, in a real combat situation, such a positioning error could be fatal. The assault teams moved on signal, their entry through the building's doors executed with the precision that came from countless hours of practice. Maria watched as they flowed through the structure, their movements coordinated and purposeful as they systematically cleared each room. The sound of simulated gunfire echoed across the training area as they engaged pop-up targets and responded to the scripted scenarios built into the exercise. From her elevated position, Maria could see the entire tactical picture in a way that the Marines on the ground could not. She watched as the squad leader made decisions based on limited information, responding to threats and opportunities as they developed. His performance was competent but not exceptional, reflecting the solid training he had received, but also revealing areas where his tactical understanding could be improved. The exercise continued for 45 minutes, with the squad methodically working through the building complex and engaging targets according to the established rules of engagement. Maria observed their techniques, noting both strengths and weaknesses in their performance. The point man was aggressive, but sometimes took unnecessary risks. The squad leader was cautious, but occasionally missed opportunities to exploit tactical advantages. The support team was accurate, but slow to acquire targets. When the exercise concluded, the Marines gathered in the debriefing area for an immediate after-action review. Maria could hear their conversation through the tower's communication system, listening as they discussed their performance and identified areas for improvement. The exercise controller provided feedback that was detailed and constructive, pointing out specific moments where different decisions might have led to better outcomes. Overall, good performance, the Master Sergeant said. Your entry was clean, your communication was effective, and you maintained good fire discipline throughout. However, There were several instances where your positioning could have been better optimized for mutual support. Maria found herself nodding in agreement with the assessment. The positioning issue she had noticed was exactly the kind of tactical error that experienced instructors were trained to identify and correct. The fact that the exercise controller had spotted it confirmed her own understanding of the tactical principles involved. The second squad's preparation began immediately after the first team's debrief concluded. Maria watched as they conducted their own equipment checks and received their mission briefing. This squad was noticeably more experienced, their movements more fluid, and their equipment configurations more sophisticated. Several of the Marines bore the insignia of combat veterans, and their approach to the exercise reflected the confidence that came from having applied these techniques in actual combat situations. Their target was a different building complex, one that presented a more challenging tactical problem. The structure was designed to simulate a multi-story apartment building with numerous rooms, multiple stairwells, and rooftop access. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were positioned throughout the building, with particular emphasis on the upper floors where they could observe and engage approaching forces. The squad leader for this evolution was a staff sergeant, whose bearing and demeanor suggested extensive combat experience. Maria watched as he conducted his initial reconnaissance, studying the building from multiple angles and identifying potential entry points, fields of fire, and escape routes. His approach was methodical and thorough, reflecting the kind of tactical thinking that could mean the difference between success and failure in actual combat. Unlike the first squad, this team chose a more complex approach to the problem. Rather than conducting simultaneous entries, they decided to secure the building floor by floor, establishing a base of fire on each level before advancing to the next. This technique was more time-consuming, but also more thorough, ensuring that cleared areas remained secure and that the squad maintained control over their tactical situation. Maria found herself impressed by the squad leader's decision-making process. He was balancing multiple factors simultaneously: the need for speed, the requirement for thoroughness, the safety of his Marines, and the tactical demands of the situation. His choices reflected a sophisticated understanding of urban combat principles and the experience necessary to apply them effectively under pressure. The execution of their plan was noticeably superior to the first squad's performance. The Marines moved with precision and confidence, their individual actions coordinated seamlessly with the overall tactical plan. When they encountered unexpected resistance, they adapted quickly, adjusting their approach without losing momentum or compromising their security. Maria watched as they cleared the first floor, their movements economical and effective. The point man's technique was flawless, his positioning and timing exactly right for the tactical situation. The squad leader's control was evident in the way his Marines responded to his commands, their actions coordinated and purposeful. As they advanced to the second floor, the scenario became more complex. The exercise controllers had positioned multiple targets throughout the level, some of them in concealed positions that would require careful searching to locate. The squad adapted their technique accordingly, conducting a more deliberate clearance that emphasized thoroughness over speed. From her observation position, Maria could see the tactical picture developing in real time. The squad was performing well, but they were also facing challenges that tested their training and experience. One of the Marines was struggling with the physical demands of the exercise, his movements becoming less precise as fatigue set in. Another was having difficulty coordinating with his team members, his positioning occasionally interfering with their fields of fire. The squad leader recognized these problems and made subtle adjustments to his plan, repositioning his Marines to better utilize their individual strengths while compensating for their weaknesses. His leadership was evident, not in dramatic gestures or shouted commands, but in the quiet competence with which he managed his team's performance. The climax of the exercise came as the squad approached the building's top floor. Intelligence indicated that the primary enemy position was located there, with multiple fighters positioned to defend the stairwell approaches. The tactical challenge was significant: how to assault a prepared position while minimizing casualties and maintaining tactical momentum. The squad leader's solution was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than conducting a frontal assault up the stairwells, he positioned his Marines to create a crossfire that would suppress the enemy positions while a small element used external routes to access the roof. From there, they could attack the enemy positions from an unexpected direction, disrupting their defensive preparations and creating opportunities for the main assault force. Maria watched with fascination as the plan unfolded. The coordination required was extraordinary, with multiple teams operating simultaneously while maintaining communication and mutual support. The timing had to be perfect, the positioning precise, and the execution flawless. The assault succeeded, but not without revealing areas where the squad's performance could be improved. The external assault team took longer than expected to reach their position, forcing the suppression teams to maintain their fire longer than planned. One of the Marines in the main assault force moved too quickly, exposing himself to enemy fire, and requiring his teammates to adjust their approach to provide him with adequate cover. During the debrief, the Master Sergeant's assessment was more detailed and nuanced than it had been for the first squad. He praised the squad leader's tactical thinking and the team's overall execution, but he also identified specific areas where their performance could be enhanced. The discussion that followed was sophisticated and professional, with the Marines actively participating in the analysis of their own performance. Maria found herself taking extensive notes during this debrief, recording not only the tactical lessons being discussed, but also the methodology being used to conduct the analysis. The process was as educational as the exercise itself, demonstrating how experienced professionals approach the continuous improvement of their skills and capabilities. The third squad's exercise was scheduled for the afternoon, after a break that allowed the Marines to rest and prepare for their own evolution. Maria used this time to review her notes and reflect on what she had observed during the morning's training. The differences between the two squads had been significant, reflecting not just variations in experience and training, but also different approaches to tactical problem-solving. She found herself mentally rehearsing how she would have approached the same tactical challenges, drawing on her extensive theoretical knowledge and her observations of the morning's exercises. In several cases, she believed she could identify alternative approaches that might have been more effective, solutions that reflected her understanding of the tactical principles involved. The afternoon exercise presented a different type of challenge entirely. The target was a complex of connected buildings that simulated a small urban district, complete with narrow alleyways, multiple levels, and numerous potential hiding places for enemy forces. The scenario was designed to test the squad's ability to operate in a more fluid tactical environment, where the enemy's positions and intentions were less predictable. Maria watched as the third squad conducted their initial reconnaissance, noting the methodical approach they took to understanding their tactical environment. Their preparation was thorough and professional, reflecting the high standards that characterized the advanced training program. However, she also noticed subtle indicators that suggested this squad might be less experienced than the second team, their movements slightly less fluid and their equipment configurations more standardized. As the exercise began, Maria's attention was drawn to a tactical problem that the squad leader hadn't fully considered. The building complex was designed with multiple interconnected passages that would allow enemy forces to move between structures without being detected. The squad's approach focused on clearing each building individually, but it didn't adequately account for the possibility that enemies might reoccupy previously cleared areas. She watched with growing concern as the squad advanced through the complex, their technique solid, but their overall situational awareness limited by the constraints of their tactical plan. They were performing well within the parameters of their chosen approach, but they were also creating vulnerabilities that a more sophisticated enemy could exploit. The problem became apparent when the squad had cleared approximately half of the target area. Enemy forces that had been displaced from earlier positions began to reappear in areas that the Marines had already secured, creating a tactical situation that their original plan hadn't anticipated. The squad leader recognized the problem quickly, but his response revealed the limitations of his tactical thinking. Rather than adapting his approach to address the new tactical reality, he attempted to solve the problem by increasing the tempo of his advance, hoping to clear the remaining buildings before the enemy could consolidate their positions. The decision reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of the tactical principles involved, prioritizing speed over control and potentially compromising the safety of his Marines. Maria found herself leaning forward in her chair, her attention focused intently on the developing situation. She could see the tactical solution that the squad leader was missing, an approach that would address the root cause of the problem rather than simply treating its symptoms. The solution required a more sophisticated understanding of urban combat principles, but it was well within the capabilities of properly trained Marines. As the exercise continued, the squad's performance began to deteriorate under the pressure of the tactical challenges they were facing. Individual Marines started making errors, their movements becoming less coordinated and their communication less effective. The squad leader's attempts to maintain control were becoming increasingly frantic, his commands more frequent and less precise. Maria watched with a mixture of professional interest and personal frustration as the situation continued to develop. She could see exactly what needed to be done, could identify the tactical adjustments that would restore the squad's effectiveness and ensure mission success. But she could only observe, her knowledge and insights confined to the notepad she carried and the observations she recorded for later review. The exercise concluded with mixed results. The squad had successfully cleared the target area and engaged all enemy forces, but their performance had been uneven and their tactical approach had created unnecessary risks. The debrief that followed was more critical than the previous sessions, with the Master Sergeant identifying specific areas where the squad's performance had fallen short of established standards. As the afternoon sun began to set over the training facility, Maria gathered her notes and prepared to leave the observation tower. She had spent the entire day watching other Marines practice the skills she desperately wanted to develop, observing techniques she had studied but never applied, and analyzing tactical problems she understood but had never been allowed to solve. Walk back to her quarters took her past Marines who were discussing the day's training. Their conversations focused on lessons learned and techniques practiced. She listened to their discussions with the detached interest of someone who understood the subject matter but had not participated in the experiences being described. In her room that evening, Maria transcribed her observations into a more organized format, creating a comprehensive analysis of the day's training that reflected both her theoretical knowledge and her practical insights. The document would never be seen by anyone in a position to act on her recommendations, but the process of creating it helped her consolidate her own understanding of the tactical principles involved. As she worked, Maria reflected on the day's experiences and the insights they had provided into the nature of combat training and military leadership. She had observed Marines at different levels of experience and capability, had seen how theoretical knowledge translated into practical application, and had gained a deeper appreciation for the complexities involved in preparing for combat operations. But she had also experienced the frustration of being limited to observation, of having knowledge and insights that could contribute to improved performance, but no opportunity to share them with the people who needed to hear them. The day had been educational, but it had also reinforced her determination to find a way to move beyond the role of observer and become an active participant in the training she found so compelling. The emergency klaxon shattered the pre-dawn quiet at 0347 hours, its harsh wail cutting through the barracks like a blade through silk. Maria's eyes snapped open instantly, her body responding to the sound with the conditioned reflexes of someone who had trained for this moment, without ever experiencing it. Around her, the base erupted into controlled chaos as Marines threw out. The compound reacted to the alert that everyone hoped they would never hear during the training exercise. She rolled out of her bunk and into her boots in one fluid motion, her hands already reaching for the gear she kept prepared beside her bed. The emergency protocols were clear and had been drilled into every person on the base. All personnel were to report to their designated assembly areas immediately upon hearing the alert. No exceptions, no delays, no questions until the situation had been assessed and appropriate responses implemented. The hallway outside her quarters was filled with Marines moving with purposeful urgency, their faces still bearing the soft confusion of interrupted sleep, but their actions sharp and professional. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow that made the familiar corridor look alien and threatening. The sound of boots on tile echoed off the walls, creating a percussion that matched the rapid heartbeat of adrenaline-fueled urgency. Maria joined the flow of personnel moving toward the assembly area, her medical bag slung over one shoulder and her mind already running through the triage procedures she might need to implement. The bag contained the basic supplies required for field treatment of trauma casualties, equipment she had inspected and replenished countless times but had never been required to use in an actual emergency situation. The base communication system crackled to life with a voice that carried the calm authority of someone trained to deliver critical information under pressure. All personnel, this is base operations. We have reports of a training accident in Sector 7. Multiple casualties reported. All medical personnel report to your designated emergency stations immediately. All other personnel remain in assembly areas pending further instructions. Maria's pace quickened as she processed the information. Sector 7 contained the advanced combat training facilities, including the urban warfare complex where she had spent the previous day observing exercises. The mention of multiple casualties suggested something serious, possibly involving the explosive breaching training that was scheduled for the early morning hours. She arrived at the medical facility to find it already transforming into an emergency treatment center. Hospital Corpsman First Class Rodriguez was coordinating the response, his years of combat experience evident in the calm efficiency with which he was organizing resources and personnel. The treatment bays were being prepared for trauma cases, with additional equipment being wheeled into position and emergency supplies being distributed to treatment teams. "Santos," Rodriguez called out when he spotted her. "I need you to prep Treatment Bay 3 for potential blast trauma. Full surgical. Setup, blood products ready, and make sure we have extra supplies for fragment wounds." Maria nodded and immediately began the familiar process of preparing for emergency surgery. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she arranged instruments, checked equipment, and verified that all necessary supplies were available and properly organized. The work was routine, but the circumstances gave it an urgency that made every action feel critical. As she worked, she could hear radio communications from the accident scene, filtering through the facility's communication system. The initial reports were fragmented and sometimes contradictory, but gradually a clearer picture began to emerge. A training exercise involving explosive breaching had gone wrong, resulting in multiple casualties. The exact number and severity of injuries were still being determined, but ambulances were already en route to the medical facility. The first casualty arrived 12 minutes after the initial alert, a young Marine whose utilities were torn and bloodstained but whose injuries appeared to be relatively minor. Maria watched as Rodriguez and another corpsman quickly assessed and treated the man, their actions efficient and professional. The Marine was conscious and alert, complaining of ringing in his ears and some minor cuts from flying debris, but otherwise appeared to be in good condition. The second casualty was more serious. Staff Sergeant Williams from the Advanced Training Cadre was brought in on a stretcher, his face pale and his breathing labored. Maria could see immediately that he was suffering from blast-related injuries, his condition serious enough to require immediate surgical intervention. Rodriguez took charge of his treatment, calling for additional personnel and equipment as he worked to stabilize the injured Marine. As the medical team worked to save Williams, Maria found herself assigned to assist with the coordination of additional casualties that were expected to arrive shortly. The role required her to maintain communication with the accident scene, coordinate with incoming ambulances, and ensure that treatment bays were prepared for whatever injuries might be encountered. The radio traffic from Sector 7 painted a picture of a training accident that had escalated beyond the immediate blast incident. The explosion had occurred during a live-fire exercise, disrupting the careful coordination that kept such training safe. In the confusion that followed, one of the training squads had become separated from their instructors and was now missing. In the complex urban training environment, "Medical, this is Sector 7 Control," came the voice through the radio. "We have a squad of 6 Marines who are unaccounted for following the blast incident. They were conducting building clearance exercises in the eastern sector when the explosion occurred. We've lost radio contact and need to organize a search and recovery operation." Maria felt her pulse quicken as she processed the information. A missing squad in a training environment, designed to simulate combat conditions, was a serious situation that required immediate action. The blast had occurred in a different part of the facility, but the shock and confusion it caused could have led to navigation errors or communication failures that left the squad isolated and potentially in danger. Rodriguez appeared at her side, his expression grim. "Santos, I need you to coordinate with the search teams. Your knowledge of the training facility layout could be valuable in planning the recovery operation." Maria nodded, understanding the assignment and its implications. Her months of observing training exercises had given her detailed knowledge of the facility's layout, including areas that were not commonly used and passages that might not be immediately obvious to search teams. She had studied the complex extensively, noting potential hazards and alternative routes that could be relevant in an emergency situation. The search operation was being coordinated from the facility's command center, a room filled with communications equipment and tactical displays that showed the layout of the training complex. Maria found herself standing before a large map of the facility, her finger tracing possible routes that the missing squad might have taken in their attempt to evacuate following the blast. Major Harrison, the instructor she had observed during the previous day's training, was leading the search coordination. His expression was tense but controlled, his voice calm as he issued instructions to the various search teams being deployed throughout the complex. When he noticed Maria studying the map, he moved to her position. "Santos," he said, his tone professional but strained. "Rodriguez says you have detailed knowledge of the facility layout. I need you to help us identify areas where a disoriented squad might have taken shelter or become trapped." Maria studied the map more carefully, her mind processing the information she had accumulated during her months of observation. The missing squad had been conducting exercises in Building Complex Charlie, a maze of interconnected structures that simulated a small urban district. The blast had occurred approximately 300 meters to the west, but the sound and shock could have been disorienting enough to cause navigation errors. "Sir," she said, pointing to a section of the map, "if they were in Building Charlie when the blast occurred, they might have moved toward what they thought was the evacuation route. But there's a construction area here that's been closed off for safety reasons. If they took the wrong corridor, they could have ended up in a section that's not regularly patrolled." Harrison studied the area she had indicated, his expression growing more concerned. "That section isn't included in the standard search grid. The construction work has created potential hazards that we've been avoiding during routine operations." Maria nodded, understanding the implications. The construction area contained partially demolished structures and excavation sites that pose significant safety risks. If the missing squad had entered that area in a state of confusion or disorientation, they could be facing dangers that went beyond simple navigation errors. "I recommend we prioritize that area for search operations," she said. "The squad leader is Staff Sergeant Martinez, and I've observed his training methods. He's cautious and methodical, but he's also trained to move toward what he perceives as safety. If he thought the construction area was a secure evacuation route, he might have led his squad there." Harrison nodded grimly and immediately began issuing orders to redirect search teams toward the construction area. Maria watched as the search operation adapted to incorporate her analysis, feeling a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal anxiety about the missing Marines. Radio crackled with updates from the search teams as they moved through the facility. The reports were systematic and thorough, but also increasingly concerning as each area was cleared without finding any sign of the missing squad. The construction area search was proceeding more slowly due to the hazards involved, but the teams were making steady progress through the dangerous terrain, preparing and narrating. This type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. 20-3 minutes after the search began, the breakthrough came. "Command, this is Search Team 3. We have visual contact with the missing squad. They're in the construction area, building Delta basement level. We're going to need medical support for extraction." Maria felt a surge of relief followed immediately by renewed concern. The fact that the squad needed medical support suggested that their situation was more serious than a simple navigation error. She grabbed her medical bag and prepared to accompany the extraction team, knowing that her combination of medical training and facility knowledge could be valuable in the recovery operation. The journey to the construction area took them through parts of the training facility that Maria had never seen before. The buildings were partially demolished, their walls open to reveal the internal structure and creating a maze of debris and hazards. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, casting strange shadows that made navigation difficult and potentially dangerous. The missing squad was found in the basement of a building that had been scheduled for demolition. The blast had caused them to seek shelter in what they thought was a secure location, but falling debris had blocked their exit route and injured two of the Marines. They had been trapped for over an hour, unable to communicate with the outside world and uncertain about the nature of the emergency that had occurred. Maria immediately began assessing the injured Marines while the extraction team worked to clear the debris blocking their exit. The injuries were primarily cuts and bruises from falling concrete, but one Marine was showing signs of a possible concussion and needed immediate medical attention. Her training and experience allowed her to quickly prioritize the casualties and begin appropriate treatment. As she worked, Maria was struck by the professionalism and courage of the Marines around her. Despite being trapped in a dangerous situation, the squad had maintained their discipline and organization. They had established security positions, attempted to find alternative exit routes, and provided mutual support to their injured teammates. Their behavior under stress exemplified the training and character that defined the Marine Corps. The extraction took 45 minutes, with each Marine being carefully moved through the debris field to safety. Maria accompanied the most seriously injured Marine to the medical facility, monitoring his condition during transport and providing continuous care. The experience was unlike anything she had encountered during her routine medical duties, requiring her to adapt her skills to an active emergency situation. Back at the medical facility, the full scope of the training accident became clear. Blast had been caused by a malfunction in the explosive breaching equipment, resulting in a detonation that was significantly more powerful than intended. While the immediate casualties were relatively minor, The incident had highlighted weaknesses in the facility's emergency response procedures and communication systems. Maria spent the remainder of the day treating casualties and assisting with the investigation into the accident. Her role evolved from simple medical support to active participation in the analysis of what had gone wrong and how similar incidents could be prevented in the future. Her knowledge of the facility and her observations of training procedures provided valuable insights into the factors that had contributed to the accident. As the sun set over Camp Pendleton, Maria reflected on the day's events and their significance. She had been thrust into a situation that required her to apply her medical training, her tactical knowledge, and her understanding of the training facility in ways that went far beyond her normal duties. The experience had been challenging and stressful, but it had also been deeply satisfying in a way that her routine assignments never were. More importantly, the day had demonstrated that her knowledge and skills were valuable in ways that extended beyond the narrow confines of her official role. Her analysis had helped locate the missing squad. Her medical training had contributed to their safe extraction, and her insights had added to the investigation of the accident. She had proven herself capable of performing under pressure and contributing meaningfully to complex operations. The emergency had also revealed something else. The artificial barriers that separated her from combat training were less meaningful than the demonstrated ability to perform when it mattered most. While she had not been officially qualified for search and rescue operations, her actual performance had been indistinguishable from that of Marines who held such qualifications. The difference was not in capability, but in opportunity. As she completed her shift and prepared to return to her quarters, Maria realized that the day had been a turning point. She had moved beyond the role of observer and had become an active participant in operations that tested her skills and knowledge. The experience had been challenging, but it had also confirmed her belief that she was capable of much more than her current assignment allowed. The events of the day would be investigated, analyzed, and incorporated into improved training procedures. But for Maria, the most important outcome was the recognition that her potential extended far beyond the limitations that others had tried to place on her. She had proven herself when it mattered most, and that knowledge would sustain her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The aftermath of the training accident had created ripples throughout the command structure at Camp Pendleton, waves of administrative review and policy examination that reached far beyond the immediate participants. Maria found herself at the center of several of these inquiries, not as a subject of investigation, but as someone whose actions and insights had proven valuable during the crisis. The recognition was subtle but significant, marking the first time her expertise had been formally acknowledged by senior personnel. 3 days after the incident, she received orders to report to the office of Colonel Patricia Hawkins, the commanding officer of the Training and Education Command. The summons was unexpected, delivered through official channels with the kind of formal language that suggested either commendation or discipline. Maria had no way of knowing which until she stood before the colonel's desk, her posture perfect, and her expression carefully neutral. Colonel Hawkins was a woman in her early 50s whose career had spanned the gradual evolution of women's roles in the military. She had earned her position through exceptional performance in assignments that had tested her capabilities in ways that Maria could only imagine. Her office reflected both her personal achievements and the institutional history of the Marine Corps, with photographs of training exercises, combat deployments, and ceremony formations covering the walls. Santos, the colonel began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. I've been reviewing the reports from the incident in Sector 7. Your performance during the emergency response was exemplary. The search team leaders specifically mentioned your knowledge of the facility layout and your ability to predict where the missing squad might have taken shelter. Maria remained at attention, uncertain whether a response was expected. The colonel's tone was professional but not unfriendly, suggesting that the meeting was positive rather than disciplinary. Still, she had learned to be cautious about reading too much into the initial moments of any interaction with senior officers. Your medical supervisor Rodriguez has also provided detailed feedback about your performance during the casualty treatment phase. He indicates that your technical skills and decision-making under pressure were superior to many Marines with more experience in emergency medical response. The colonel paused, studying Maria with the appraising look of someone who had learned to evaluate personnel quickly and accurately. What I find most interesting, however, is the analysis you provided during the accident investigation. Your observations about the training procedures and facility design showed a level of tactical understanding that goes well beyond your current assignment. Maria felt her pulse quicken slightly, sensing that the conversation was leading toward something significant. Thank you, ma'am. I've spent considerable time studying tactical procedures and facility operations. So I've heard, Colonel Hawkins replied, her tone suggesting that she had done considerable research before this meeting. I understand you've been requesting assignment to combat training programs for some time. I've reviewed your academic records, your physical fitness evaluations, and your performance assessments. All of them are exceptional. The colonel moved to a window that overlooked the training areas where Marines were conducting afternoon exercises. Her posture suggested someone who was weighing difficult decisions, balancing competing priorities and institutional constraints. The policy regarding women in combat training is evolving, she continued. There's increasing recognition that capability, rather than gender, should be the primary criterion for assignment to specialized programs. However, implementing such changes in a way that maintains unit effectiveness and respects institutional traditions requires careful consideration. Maria listened intently, understanding that she was receiving information that went beyond her individual situation. The colonel was describing policy discussions that occurred at levels far above her own rank, decisions that would affect not just her career, but the careers of women throughout the military. I'm authorized to inform you that you've been selected for a pilot program, Colonel Hawkins said, turning back to face Maria directly. You'll be assigned to the Advanced Combat Training course, not as an observer, but as a full participant. Your performance will be evaluated according to the same standards applied to all Marines in the program. The words hit Maria like a physical blow, the impact of long-sought opportunity mixed with the sudden reality of having to prove herself under intense scrutiny. She had prepared for this moment for months, but the actual announcement still felt surreal. However, the colonel continued, her tone becoming more serious. I want to be clear about what this means. You'll be the only woman in the program, which means you'll be operating under a level of attention that your male counterparts won't experience. Every aspect of your performance will be analyzed, documented, and evaluated by people who have varying opinions about women combat roles. Maria nodded, understanding the implications. She would be a test case, a representative of all women seeking similar opportunities. Her success or failure would be used to justify future policy decisions that extended far beyond her individual career. The training begins in 1 week, Colonel Hawkins said. You'll be assigned to 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company, under the command of Captain Rodriguez. He's been briefed on the pilot program and has agreed to evaluate your performance based solely on your demonstrated capabilities. The meeting concluded with administrative details about reporting procedures and equipment requirements. As Maria left the colonel's office, she felt the weight of opportunity and responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy pack. She had gotten what she wanted, but she also understood that the path ahead would be more challenging than anything she had previously experienced. The news of her assignment spread through the base with the speed that characterized all significant developments in military communities. Reactions ranged from genuine support to skeptical curiosity to outright hostility, reflecting the diverse opinions that existed within the Marine Corps' about women in combat roles. Maria found herself the subject of conversations she wasn't part of, evaluated by people who had never spoken to her, and judged by standards that seemed to shift depending on who was applying them. Her preparation for the training program became consuming, occupying every moment of her off-duty time. She reviewed tactical manuals, studied equipment specifications, and practiced physical exercises that would be required during the course. Her approach was systematic and thorough, driven by the understanding that she could not afford to be merely competent. She had to excel. The physical training component was particularly challenging, not because the standards were beyond her capabilities, but because she knew that her performance would be scrutinized more carefully than that of her male counterparts. Every repetition, every timed run, every strength exercise would be analyzed for evidence of whether women could meet the demands of combat training. She increased her training intensity, pushing herself through workouts that left her exhausted, but increasingly confident in her physical preparation. The base gym became her second home, with early morning and late evening sessions that allowed her to train when it was less crowded and she could focus without distraction. Her tactical preparation was equally intensive. She studied every manual, every case study, every after-action report she could access. Her knowledge of urban combat techniques, small unit tactics, and weapon systems became encyclopedic. She practiced disassembling and reassembling weapons until she could do it blindfolded, memorized radio procedures until they became second nature, and studied map reading until she could navigate by terrain association alone. The psychological preparation was perhaps the most challenging aspect of her preparation. She knew that she would face skepticism, hostility, and constant evaluation from people who doubted her capabilities. She had to develop the mental resilience to perform under that kind of pressure while maintaining the professional composure that would be required in a military training environment. Her conversations with Rodriguez during this period were particularly valuable. The experienced corpsman had worked with combat units and understood the dynamics she would face. His advice was practical and direct, focusing on the specific challenges she would encounter and the strategies she could use to overcome them. The key, he told her during one of their preparation sessions, is to never let them see you doubt yourself. There will be moments when you feel overwhelmed, when the pressure seems too intense, when you wonder if you're in over your head. That's normal. Every Marine in combat training goes through it. But for you, showing that doubt will be seen as evidence that women can't handle the stress of combat. Maria understood the unfairness of the double standard, but she also accepted it as part of the reality she would have to navigate. She developed mental exercises that helped her maintain confidence under pressure, visualization techniques that prepared her for challenging scenarios, and coping strategies that would help her deal with the isolation of being the only woman in the program. The equipment preparation was extensive and detailed. She had to acquire specialized gear that was not part of her normal medical kit, including combat equipment, protective gear, and weapons that she had studied but never used. Each piece of equipment had to be properly fitted, tested, and integrated into a system that would allow her to perform effectively under demanding conditions. Her weapon training was particularly intensive. While she had qualified with standard military weapons, the combat training program required proficiency with specialized firearms and equipment that demanded higher levels of skill and familiarity. She spent hours on the firing range, developing the muscle memory and precision that would be required during live-fire exercises. The week of preparation passed quickly, filled with last-minute studies, equipment checks, and final physical training sessions. Maria found herself sleeping poorly, her mind racing through scenarios and possibilities, her body tense with anticipation and anxiety. She had worked toward this opportunity for months, but the reality of actually beginning the program felt both exciting and terrifying. Her final conversation with Colonel Hawkins occurred the day before training was scheduled to begin. The colonel had requested a brief meeting, ostensibly to review administrative details, but actually to provide final guidance and support. "Santos," the colonel said, her tone more personal than it had been during their previous meeting, "I want you to understand that this pilot program represents more than just an individual opportunity. You're opening doors that have been closed for generations of women who wanted to serve in combat roles." Maria nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility. "I understand, ma'am. I won't let you down. I'm not concerned about you letting me down," Colonel Hawkins replied. "I'm concerned about the pressure you're putting on yourself. This program is designed to test your capabilities, not to prove a point about gender integration. Focus on your performance, not on the political implications of your success or failure." The advice was sound, but Maria knew that separating her individual performance from its broader significance would be difficult. She was not just another Marine entering combat training. She was a test case for a policy change that could affect thousands of women throughout the military. As she left the colonel's office for the final time before beginning training, Maria felt a mixture of anticipation and determination. She had prepared as thoroughly as possible, both physically and mentally. Her knowledge was comprehensive, her skills were sharp, and her motivation was absolute. The next phase of her career would test everything she had learned and everything she believed about her own capabilities. The evening before training began, Maria sat in her quarters reviewing her notes and equipment one final time. Her gear was organized and ready, her body was prepared for the physical demands ahead, and her mind was focused on the challenges she would face. She had dreamed of this opportunity for months, and now it was finally within reach. Outside her window, the base was settling into its evening routine. The sounds of training exercises had faded, replaced by the quieter activities of Marines preparing for another day of service. Soon, she would be joining them not as an observer or a support person, but as a full participant in the most demanding training the Marine Corps had to offer. The opportunity she had fought for was finally here. Tomorrow she would begin proving that her capabilities were limited only by her determination and skill, not by the assumptions and prejudices of others. The path ahead would be difficult, but she was ready to walk it with the confidence and competence that had brought her this far. The first rays of dawn were barely visible over the eastern horizon when Maria arrived at the advanced combat training course assembly area, her boots crunching softly on the gravel path that led to the concrete pad where 23 Marines stood in loose formation. The air was crisp with the coolness that preceded the California sun's daily assault on the desert landscape, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of vehicles. Moving along the base's main thoroughfares, she took her position at the end of the formation, her gear properly arranged and her uniform immaculate despite the early hour. Around her, the other Marines conducted their own final preparations, checking equipment, adjusting straps, and engaging in the quiet conversations that characterized military personnel preparing for challenging training. None of them looked directly at her, but she could feel their awareness of her presence like a physical weight. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the administrative building with the purposeful stride of someone who had conducted this ritual dozens of times before. He was a compact man in his late 30s, his weathered face bearing the kind of tan that came from years of outdoor training exercises. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his boots polished to a mirror finish, and his bearing suggested the quiet competence of someone who had proven himself in the most demanding circumstances. "Good morning, Marines," he said, his voice carrying easily across the formation without seeming to strain. "Welcome to the Advanced Combat Training Course. Over the next 8 weeks, you will be tested in ways that will challenge every aspect of your training, your character, and your commitment to the Marine Corps." Maria listened intently, understanding that the words were more than just a welcome speech. They were a declaration of intent, a promise that the coming weeks would push each Marine to their limits and beyond. She had prepared for this moment for months, but she also understood that no amount of preparation could fully anticipate the reality of what lay ahead. This course is designed to identify and develop Marines who can operate effectively in the most demanding combat environments. Rodriguez continued. You will learn advanced tactics, master sophisticated weapon systems, and develop the leadership skills necessary to command Marines in combat. Not all of you will successfully complete this training. Those who do will be qualified for assignment to specialized units that conduct the most dangerous missions in the Marine Corps. The captain's gaze swept across the formation, pausing briefly on each Marine as he assessed their readiness and commitment. When his eyes met Maria's, she saw neither skepticism nor special consideration, just the professional evaluation of someone who was focused on capability rather than demographics. The standards for this course are absolute, Rodriguez said. There are no participation trophies, no second chances, and no accommodations for personal circumstances. You will meet the requirements, or you will be dismissed from the program. Your performance will be evaluated continuously, and those who cannot maintain the necessary standards will be removed immediately. Maria felt her pulse quicken slightly at the bluntness of the statement. She had expected the training to be demanding, but the captain's words made it clear that the margin for error was essentially non-existent. Every exercise, every test, every moment of performance would be scrutinized and evaluated according to standards that had been proven in combat. Your first exercise will begin in 30 minutes, Rodriguez announced. You will conduct a 10-kilometer movement to contact, followed by a tactical problem that will test your ability to adapt to changing conditions under pressure. This is not a warm-up or an introduction. This is an evaluation of your current capabilities and your potential for development. The formation was dismissed, and the Marines began their final preparations for the exercise. Maria checked her equipment one more time, ensuring that her weapon was properly zeroed, her ammunition was correctly distributed, and her communications gear was functioning properly. The routine was familiar, but the stakes were higher than anything she had previously experienced. As she prepared, she became aware of conversations taking place around her, fragments of discussion that revealed the attitudes and expectations of her fellow Marines. Some were curious about her presence, others were skeptical, and a few were openly hostile. She had expected this reaction, but experiencing it firsthand was still challenging. I heard they're using this course to test whether women can handle combat training, said a lance corporal whose name tape read Johnson. His voice was low, but not so quiet that Maria couldn't hear him. Supposedly, if she makes it through, they're going to open up more programs. That's a lot of pressure to put on one person, replied another Marine, his tone suggesting genuine concern rather than criticism. I wouldn't want to be responsible for making policy decisions based on my individual performance. A third voice, belonging to a corporal with the confident bearing of someone who had been through similar training before, was less sympathetic. If she can't handle the pressure, she shouldn't be here. Combat doesn't care about your feelings or your personal circumstances. Either you can do the job or you can't. Maria continued her equipment check, her expression neutral despite the tension she felt building in her chest. The conversation was exactly the kind of scrutiny she had expected, but hearing it voiced so directly was still unsettling. She understood that every aspect of her performance would be analyzed not just for its immediate tactical value, but for its implications regarding broader policy decisions. The movement to the exercise area was conducted in tactical formation, with the Marines spread out in a column that provided security while allowing for rapid movement across the varied terrain. Maria found herself in the middle of the formation, her position determined by the captain's assessment of her experience level rather than any special consideration for her gender. The pace was demanding but not excessive, designed to test endurance and tactical awareness rather than pure speed. Maria maintained her position easily, her months of intensive physical preparation paying dividends as she moved across the rocky terrain without difficulty. Around her, the other Marines were also performing well, their movements efficient and their spacing appropriate for the tactical situation. The exercise area was a natural amphitheater surrounded by hills and broken terrain that provided excellent concealment and numerous tactical challenges. In the center of the area, a mock village had been constructed with buildings, streets, and obstacles that simulated the kind of urban environment where Marines were increasingly required to operate. Captain Rodriguez and his assistant instructors positioned themselves on high ground where they could observe the exercise and evaluate each Marine's performance. They carried clipboards and communication equipment that would allow them to track individual actions and coordinate the complex scenario they were about to implement. "Marines," Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying clearly across the training area. "You have just received intelligence that enemy forces are holding American civilians in the village ahead. Your mission is to conduct a rescue operation while minimizing casualties to both the hostages and your own personnel. You have 20 minutes to plan and execute your mission." The scenario is complex and demanding, requiring the Marines to balance multiple objectives while operating under time pressure and with limited information. Maria immediately began analyzing the tactical situation, noting the layout of the village, the likely positions of enemy forces, and the various approaches that could be used to accomplish the mission. Around her, the other Marines were conducting their own assessments, some working individually while others formed small groups to discuss potential approaches. The diversity of their responses reflected different levels of experience and different tactical philosophies, but all were focused on developing effective solutions to the problem they had been given. Maria found herself gravitating toward a group of Marines who were discussing a coordinated approach that emphasized stealth and precision over speed and firepower. The discussion was professional and focused, with each Marine contributing insights based on their individual expertise and experience. "The key is to isolate the target building without alerting the enemy forces in the surrounding structures," said Staff Sergeant Martinez, a veteran with combat experience who had emerged as an informal leader among the Marines. "If we can get close enough to identify the hostage location, we can plan a precise extraction that minimizes risk to everyone involved." Maria studied the village layout, noting details that others might have missed. "The water tower provides excellent overwatch of the entire area," she said, pointing to a structure on the village's eastern edge. "If we can position a sniper there, he can provide early warning of enemy movement and covering fire during the extraction." The other Marines looked at her with interest, their expressions suggesting that they were evaluating her tactical thinking rather than dismissing it based on her gender. Martinez nodded approvingly, his reaction indicating that he found her analysis valuable. "Good observation," he said. "That position would give us the visibility we need to coordinate the entire operation. Who has the best marksmanship qualifications?" The planning continued for another 10 minutes with each Marine contributing to the development of a comprehensive tactical plan. Maria found herself actively involved in the discussion, her knowledge and insights valued by the group, despite her status as the only woman in the program. When the planning period ended, the Marines moved to implement their strategy. Maria was assigned to the support element, responsible for providing security and communications during the main assault. Her position required her to coordinate between different elements of the attack force while maintaining awareness of the overall tactical situation. The execution phase of the exercise was intense and demanding, requiring split-second decision-making and precise coordination between multiple teams. Maria found herself in the center of the action, her communications equipment crackling with reports from various elements, and her eyes constantly scanning the battlefield for threats and opportunities. The enemy forces, played by instructors, using blank ammunition and simulation equipment, provided realistic resistance that tested every aspect of the Marines' training. They used tactics that reflected actual combat experience, including ambushes, coordinated counterattacks, and attempts to use the civilian hostages as human shields. Maria's performance during the exercise was steady and professional, her actions contributing to the overall success of the mission, while demonstrating her ability to operate effectively under pressure. She made tactical decisions quickly and accurately, communicated clearly with other elements, and maintained situational awareness throughout the complex operation. The hostage rescue was successful, but not without cost. 2 Marines were declared casualties during the exercise, their deaths serving as reminders of the stakes involved in real combat operations. The debrief that followed was thorough and professional, with each Marine's performance analyzed in detail. Santos, Captain Rodriguez said during the individual evaluations, "Your tactical analysis during the planning phase was excellent. Your identification of the overwatch position was crucial to the mission's success. Your performance during execution was professional and effective." Maria felt a surge of satisfaction at the positive feedback, but she also understood that this was just the beginning. The exercise had been challenging, but it was also an introduction to the more demanding training that would follow. She had proven herself capable of performing at the required level, but she also knew that the standards would continue to rise. The remainder of the day included additional exercises that tested different aspects of combat skills. Maria participated in weapons training, tactical movement exercises, and leadership scenarios that challenged her ability to think and act under pressure. Her performance was consistently strong, earning the respect of her fellow Marines and the approval of her instructors. As the sun set over the training area, Maria reflected on the day's events and their significance. She had successfully completed her first day of combat training, proving that she could meet the physical and mental demands of the program. More importantly, she had demonstrated that her gender was not a limitation on her ability to contribute to military operations. The other Marines had gradually accepted her presence, their initial skepticism replaced by professional respect based on her demonstrated performance. She was no longer the woman who had been allowed into the program as an experiment. She was a Marine who had earned her place through competence and dedication. The challenges ahead would be even more demanding, but Maria felt confident in her ability to meet them. She had prepared thoroughly, both physically and mentally, and she had proven that her capabilities were limited only by her determination and skill. The path forward would be difficult, but she was ready to walk it with the confidence that came from having proven herself when it mattered most. The training program would continue for 7 more weeks, with each day bringing new challenges and opportunities to demonstrate her abilities. Maria understood that her performance would continue to be scrutinized and evaluated, but she also knew that she had established a foundation of competence that would serve her well in the trials ahead. As she prepared for sleep that night, Maria felt a deep sense of satisfaction mixed with anticipation for the challenges that lay ahead. She had taken the first step on a journey that would test everything she had learned and everything she believed about herself. The path would be demanding, but she was ready to prove that excellence knew no boundaries and that capability was the only measure that truly mattered. The recognition came not through fanfare or ceremony, but in the quiet moments between exercises when Staff Sergeant Martinez approached her with a question that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training area as Marines prepared for another day of advanced tactical instruction, their movements efficient and purposeful after 6 weeks of intensive conditioning and skill development. "Santos," Martinez said, his tone carrying the respect that was earned rather than assigned, I need your assessment of the patrol route for today's exercise. The instructors have given us 3 options, but I want to know which one you think gives us the best chance of success." Maria looked up from her equipment check, momentarily surprised by the request. Martinez was a decorated veteran with 2 combat deployments and the informal leadership of the platoon. His willingness to seek her tactical opinion represented a fundamental shift in how she was perceived by her peers, a transformation from curiosity to competence to trusted colleague. She moved to the map he held, studying the 3 routes marked in different colors. Each presented unique advantages and challenges, requiring different tactical approaches and levels of risk. The decision would affect not just the success of the exercise, but the safety of every Marine in the patrol. "Route Blue gives us the best cover and concealment," she said, tracing the path with her finger. "But it also takes us through terrain that favors defensive positions. If the enemy forces are positioned correctly, we could walk into a prepared ambush." Martinez nodded, following her analysis. Around them, other Marines had begun to gather, their attention focused on the tactical discussion rather than on the novelty of a woman providing military analysis. The shift in dynamics was subtle but significant, reflecting weeks of proven performance and demonstrated competence. "Route Red is more direct," Maria continued, "but it exposes us to observation from multiple high points. We'd have to move fast and rely on speed rather than stealth. That could work if we can coordinate our movement properly, but it's higher risk." "What about Route Green?" asked Lance Corporal Thompson, a young Marine who had shown particular promise during the training program. Maria studied the 3rd option, her mind processing the tactical implications of each terrain feature and potential enemy position. "Route Green is the most complex. It requires us to split our force and coordinate multiple elements, but it also gives us the best chance of achieving surprise. If we can execute it properly, we can approach the objective from an unexpected direction." The discussion continued for several more minutes, with each Marine contributing their own analysis and observations. Maria found herself at the center of the conversation, her tactical insights valued and respected by Marines who had initially viewed her presence with skepticism. Captain Rodriguez appeared as the discussion was concluding, his expression suggesting that he had been observing the interaction with interest. "Martinez," he said, "I assume you've briefed your team on today's objectives?" "Yes, sir," Martinez replied. "We've been discussing the approach routes and think we've identified the best option." Rodriguez nodded, then turned to Maria. "Santos, you've been studying the patrol routes. What's your recommendation?" The question was asked in front of the entire platoon, making it clear that her response would influence not just the tactical plan, but also her standing within the unit. Maria felt the weight of the moment, understanding that her answer would be evaluated not just for its tactical merit, but for its demonstration of leadership and confidence. "I recommend Route Green, sir," she said without hesitation. "It's the most challenging to execute, but it also gives us the best chance of achieving our objectives while minimizing casualties. The key is coordination and timing." Rodriguez studied her for a moment, his expression revealing nothing about his assessment of her recommendation. "Explain your reasoning." Maria moved to the map, pointing out the specific features that supported her analysis. "The enemy forces are likely positioned to cover the 2 obvious approaches, routes Blue and Red. Route Green takes us through terrain that appears less favorable, but actually provides better concealment once we understand how to use it properly." She traced the route with her finger, explaining how the patrol could use natural features to mask their movement and coordinate their approach to the objective. Her explanation was detailed and professional, demonstrating not just tactical knowledge, but also the confidence to present her ideas clearly under pressure. "The split force approach allows us to create multiple dilemmas for the enemy," she continued. "They'll have to divide their attention between different threats, which reduces their ability to concentrate their firepower against any single element." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Good analysis. Martinez, implement Santos' recommendation. She serve as your assistant team leader for this exercise. The assignment was significant, representing formal recognition of Maria's tactical abilities and leadership potential. Assistant team leader was a position typically reserved for the most experienced and capable Marines in the program, and her selection for the role demonstrated that she had earned the respect and confidence of her instructors. Patrol preparation that followed was more intensive than anything Maria had previously experienced. As assistant team leader, she was responsible for coordinating specific aspects of the mission while supporting Martinez's overall command of the element. The role required her to balance tactical planning with leadership responsibilities, ensuring that every Marine understood their part in the complex operation. Santos, Martinez said during the final briefing, I want you to take point on the coordination with the support element. Your understanding of the terrain and the enemy situation makes you the best choice for that responsibility. Maria nodded, understanding the significance of the assignment. Point coordination was a critical role that required precise timing and clear communication. The success of the entire mission would depend on her ability to manage multiple moving parts while maintaining situational awareness and making rapid decisions under pressure. The movement to the objective area took place in the pre-dawn darkness, with the patrol using night vision equipment to navigate the challenging terrain. Maria found herself at the front of the formation, her position as assistant team leader requiring her to help guide the patrol while maintaining communication with other elements. The route she had recommended proved to be exactly as challenging as she had predicted, but also exactly as advantageous. The terrain that appeared difficult from the map provided excellent concealment when properly utilized, allowing the patrol to move closer to the objective than would have been possible using the more obvious approaches. This is Santos, she whispered into her radio as the patrol reached the first checkpoint. Alpha element is in position. We have visual contact with the objective building. No enemy movement detected at this time. The response came immediately from the support element, positioned on the high ground overlooking the target area. Copy, Alpha. We have overwatch established. Be advised we're seeing movement in the secondary buildings. Recommend you hold position until we can get better intelligence. Maria relayed the information to Martinez, who made the decision to pause the advance while gathering more information about the enemy situation. The decision demonstrated the kind of tactical patience that characterized experienced leaders, prioritizing mission success over speed or aggressive action. As they waited for additional intelligence, Maria used the time to study the objective area through her binoculars. The building they were tasked to secure was a two-story structure with multiple entry points and good fields of fire from the upper windows. The enemy forces, played by instructors using simulation equipment, would likely be positioned to defend against conventional assault approaches.